This is Gemara Yevamos, Daf Yomi. All the learning should be incredible. Schashidach for Yechav Miriam Bas Chaya Pesel Chana Bas Nechama Shalom and Levi Zava Ovi Beteli Shimon and Chayis Ol Chayim and Tavira. They should all find their appropriate shadochim in the right time. Bekarei Mamish. As well as learning should be Chos for Zerach Shel Chayama for a children for Alana Bachana Malkas Yozelik Ben Yuda Rachel. They should have their Yeshua Bekarei. Well, as Chos for Shlemo Shli has been invaded Shmama Tila Naftal Yom Nechleester. Nechama Bas even of the Shava Vega Bas Ashira. Chana. Yisrael, we're holding on the bottom of Yud Zayin Amud Beis. It's really red to the end of the Amud, but just to get ourselves back into things as we're going to continue this machlekes about Zika. That was the end of yesterday's shir. Those who are looking at your screens, you'll see that at the bottom, about 10, 12 lines, we have two shitas, two highlights over here. We have Rav Huna Marav versus Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda says, Yesh Zika. Rav Huna Marav says, Ain Zika. What is this entity called Zika? Zika is the term in which we call when one is waiting Yibam, Shemeres Yavam. What is the connection between her, again, Reuven and Shimon? Reuven is Nifter, and what happens? Reuven and Shimon. Reuven is Nifter. Reuven's wife is awaiting Yibam to Reuven's brother Shimon. While they are waiting, what is the connection between Reuven's wife and Shimon? That connection is what we refer to as Zika. Now, is that connection just a term? It's the connection, or is there a halachic difference? So yesterday we saw this machlekes. Rav Huna Marav says there is no halachic difference. There is no real connection there, and the simple ramification of this that we saw yesterday was that when one is a Shemeres Yavam, Shemi saw that she dies, Shimon in this case is allowed to marry her mother, which is not called that there was a relationship between her and him. Whereas Rav Yehuda says no, Shemeres Yavam, Shemi says Aser Be'ima, even though, again, remember, Shimon did not consummate the marriage. He did not do Yibam with the ex-wife, the wife of Reuven, we'll call it. But just the mere connection, Yesh Zika, we'll see how far that goes. So it says, the Gemara will pick it up from there, 4 lines from the bottom. V'leima, why does Rav Yehuda say, Yesh Zika? Explains the Gemara, if you would have said that, Havamina would have thought, that only applies when there's one, I will betray. But I would have mistakenly thought that in the case where there are I will betray, but in the case there are two Yevamim or more, 2 or more brothers, then Ain Zika. Therefore, that's why Rav Yehuda Marav said, Aser Be'ima, and from there we extrapolate Yesh Zika. Ask the Gemara, how would you have such a Havamim of Alki Pligi? The root machlekes in whether we say Zika or not is where? It's betray Pligi. The machlekes was by 2. So if Rav Yehuda would have come along and said, I hold Yesh Zika, of course he's referring to when there are 2 brothers. Explains the Gemara, if you would have said that Allah is Kedav Yomer Yesh Zika Hava Amina. As we turn over to today's Daf Yomi and Aleph, I would have thought Mechayim. I would have thought that you're only not allowed to marry the mother while the Yevama is alive, while there is this waiting period, while she's coined the Shemeres Yavam, awaiting either Yibam or Chalitza. But what would I have thought? I would have made a mistake, and I would have thought of Lachar Misa Pakala Zika, that when she dies, the Zika goes with her. There's no longer a connection. If there's no longer a connection, then what? Shimon can marry her mother, Kamash V'lan, Zika Bechdi Lo Ibaka. So what do we learn from over here? That Zika does not disappear bechdi with nothing, and therefore even after she is nifter, Shimon is not allowed to marry her mother. And that's the machlekes of Yehuda versus Rav Yehuda Marav, whether we say Yesh Zika or Ain Zika. And ramification number 1 in which we're seeing is whether the Shemeres Yavam, whether the brother is going to be allowed to marry her mother or not. Says the Gemara, Lema Misayeh Alei, 3 lines from the top of Yirchas and Aleph. Let's bring a rayo to the shita of Rav Yehuda of Yesh Zika. Says the Gemara, Yevimta Ishamisa Mutar Be'achaisa. Of course, this is the reverse of the raya which we saw yesterday. We read it a little bit fast yesterday, but now we'll explain it a bit better. Yevimta Ishamisa, if the Yavam dies, then he is allowed to marry mutter ba'achoisa. He's allowed to marry her sister. So if she is nifter, he will call him Shimon again. Reuven had a wife. Reuven dies. Reuven's wife falls to Ibn to Shimon. Shimon and Reuven, that's this bond of Zika. Says the Gemara, if this woman dies, Shimon is allowed to marry whom? This woman's sister. Until now we've been discussing this woman's mother. Now we see this woman's sister. Says the Gemara, what's the obvious implication? Obvious you're only allowed to marry the sister and not the mother. This is exactly which Rabbi Yehuda taught us. Why? Yesh Zika, there's a connection there, and even after she dies, you're not allowed to marry your mother, because that connection at some level, as we will see, is tantamount to marriage. Says the Gemara, no raya. Who adin dafilabima, really? Rabbi Yehuda's maskim, really, you can even marry. You're even allowed to marry her mother. So why do we say sister? Right? Then Reisha Ishta Shamei. So the first case spoke about the wife dying, and then Mutter Ba'achaisa. And in that case, in which it's a wife dying, not a Yevama dying. So in that case, is Davka Ba'achaisa will be Malai Davla Isa Daraisa. That's a proper Isa Daraisa. That's a proper Erva. Tarinami Seva Mutter Ba'achaisa. So says the Gemara, there is no Raya. Now says the Gemara, classical Gemara form. Let's switch. Masav Rav Huna. First we try to bring a raya to Rav Yehuda. Now we have a kasha in Rav Yehuda. Masav Rav Huna bar Chiyasa b'maimer. What happens? We have two brothers. Again, the same case we keep on talking about. The first brother dies. His widow is awaiting Yibam. But in this case, the Yevama is waiting Yibam and what happens? The third brother is born. And of course, this was the Mishnah in which we saw yesterday. This is the Ishes Achiv Shloya Ba'alama, as we'll see. So says the Gemara, Asa Ba Maimer Umeis. If Shimon goes and performs a Maimer being Kedushin Derabanan, Maimer being Erusin, the term of Erusin with the Yevamos coined Maimer. So Shimon does Maimer, and then what happens? Umeis, and then Shimon is Nifter. So now what happens? This woman falls to Yibam to whom? To the third brother. Shania. So now, the second wife, who is the second wife? That's referring to Shimon's own wife. She has to do chalitza. She cannot do Yibam in order to get rid of this connection. We need a chalitza. End of Brisa. Let's speak out the case one more time. Reuven dies. Reuven's wife falls to Yibam to Shimon. Shimon does Maimer. He starts the process. He does Kedushin Derabanan. Shimon dies. Now Shimon's wife and this new, we'll call it the Maimer wife, falls to Yibam to Levi. Says the Gemara, Shania, Shimon's own wife, needs chalitza or not Yibam. Says the Gemara, now let's be medayik why that is true. Taima David b'maimer. The obvious implication is, of course, because he did maimer, because he started off the party, he did erusin to the Yevama. That is the reason why his own wife needs chalitza by Levi. But let's say he did not. Shnia nami yavumi miyami. Then I would assume that his own wife. What's the problem? He's nifter. His wife falls him to Levi. Levi could do even no problem. Says the Gemara v'amri Zika. But if you're going to tell me there's an entity of Zika, now we see how far this entity goes. If you're going to tell me the connection between Shimon and the Yevama, the connection itself is akin, is almost at some level like a marriage itself. So what's the difference whether they did Maimer or not? The connection itself is a form of marriage. Havyalah, what would it be a case of? Saris Ishes Achiv Shleya Balama. Then Shimon's own wife, she's a tzara of that other woman. So that other woman he did Maimer to. Says the Gemara, but we see clearly if he didn't do Maimer, then there is nothing. Obviously, Ein Zika. Says the Gemara, Kasha on Rabbi Yehuda. Answers the Gemara, of course, because Rabbi Yehuda holds the Zika, and we see clearly in this Brisa, Ein Zika, that only because he did Maimer, because he started off the story with this new wife, with the Yevama, that's why there's an issue. But without of that, there would be no issue. Explains the Gemara, Amarabu, but Maimer, really, it's not true. Your diak was incorrect. Even if you did not do Maimer, the din would not change. Shnia Michlatz Chaltza Yevuma Loy Yevama. The second wife, Shimon's own wife, would always need chalitza and ayibum. So the obvious kasha. So why did it say the case of Maimer? Vaha Dikatani Maimer Lafuki mi Beishamai for a different reason. What's Beishamai? Ta'amri Maimer Koine Kinyan Gomer. Fascinating. Beis Shammai holds even when he did only Maimer being Erusin, that's a full-fledged kinyan, and therefore the Beis Shammai, they're fully married. Shimon's fully married to the Yevama. When Shimon dies, what happens? And there's two women now that fall no brown to Levi, and what happens? Everything is good and dandy. They can do whatever they want. Kamash Malon, not like Beis Shammai. Not like Beis Shammai, and rather you need to actually do chalitza. Because why? Because the maimer is not a full-fledged marriage. Again, let's just speak out that according to Beis Shammai, what would happen? The own wife would not require chalitza. Why? Because there's a real marriage. Again, I said it a little bit incorrect. Let me correct myself. According to Beis Shammai, they did maimer. Maimer is a full-fledged marriage. So what happened? According to Beis Shammai, Reuven dies. His wife falls to Yibam to Shimon. Shimon does a maimer, which we know now means marriage. According to Beis Shammai, fully married. Wonderful. Shimon dies. Now Shimon has this Yevama, the woman he married, that did maimer to, which is marriage. And Shimon has another, his own wife, that's Sarah. What's the din when Shimon dies? They fall to Levi. Lach is nothing. They do not even require chalitza. Why? Because midaraisa they're forbidden, because they're the tzara of the ishis ach shaloi haya ba'alamai. That is the din in our Mishnah. That is Levi. Levi that was born after the party started. He does not able to do Yibam. According to the first din, according to our Braisa, you have to chalitza because there's a little bit of a connection left. Says the Gemara, Kasha and Rav Yehuda and Teretz Eisvei. Let's continue. Says the Gemara, another Kasha Eisvei Abaye Shnei Achan Ba'ilam Echad Umeis Echem Mehem B'Loi Vlad. We have two brothers, Reuven and Shimon. One of them dies. Va'amad Echem Mehem B'Loi Vlad. Va'amad Umeis Echem Mehem B'Loi Vlad. Excuse me. One of them dies. Reuven dies. Amad Hasheni Hazeh. Last says Ma'im B'Yavintoi. And this second man, Shimon, gets up to do Yibam. V'loi. And again, these words we're going to see right now. We're going to come back to this case. Let's at least read the Braisa. So Shimon tries to do Maimer. He tries to marry this woman. He tries to do Kedusha D'Rabbanan, and he does not manage to do so. What exactly that means he doesn't manage, we're going to see more tomorrow. But says the Gemara, excuse me, we see right here. Incorrect. Scratch what I just said. Apologies. One more time. Shimon is about to do Maimer. Different case, I got confused. Shimon is about to do Maimer, and boom, Mazel Tov. What happens? He has a brother. His mother gives birth. Levi is born. So Levi is born when? Before Shimon does Maimer. And now what happens? Umeis. And then Shimon himself dies. So now we have Shimon's wife and the Yevama, Reuven's wife. They both fall to this new baby Levi to Yibam. What do? Right now. So Hari Shaina, the first wife, Reuven's wife, we'll call her the Yevama. Yotza Mishamis is actually Balami. That's the tour of the Mishnah. He never was married to Reuven while Levi was born. So Levi can't get involved in this woman. It's a regular Ishazach. And therefore, they're potter from that one. Ushniya, what about Shimon's wife? Says the Gemara, what does Levi do? Levi has to be the chalitza or yibam. Says the Gemara, articulates the question on Rabbi Yehuda, Zika. If you're going to tell me that there is a Zika, that the Zika between Shimon and that woman is as if Shimon was married to her. Have Yallah. Then there's a form of marriage. Then how could Levi come and do Yibam or Chalitza? Says the Gemara, no kasha amani ramei damein zika. This brisa is Rameir holding Zika, but Rabbi Yehuda gets hold the Eish Zika, which of course now we realize that anytime we're going to find a brisa that says Ein Zika, we're just going to say that's Rameir, but that is the Gemara's kasha. That's the Gemara's teretz. Ask the Gemara, Misfirle the Rameir Ein Zika. Really, you're telling me Rameir holding Zika? Is that accurate? But tonight we learned in the Mishnah Arba Achin Shnayim Minan Nesuin Shtei Achayos. We have 4 brothers, and again, I hope by now, even though the cases when you read them they sound confusing, hopefully by now we realize there's a lot of repetition, a lot of the same type of cases. Let's not get scared by the case. So here we have Arba Achim, we have 4 brothers, Rishim Lem Yehuda, Two of them are married to two sisters. And the ones that are married to the sisters die. So what happens? So now we have their wives and their tzaras that all fall to the remaining two brothers. The two remaining brothers have to do chalitza and not yibum. Explains the Gemara. If Rameir held ein zika, then what? So I don't understand what the problem is. We have Reuven and Shimon that are married to sisters. Reuven and Shimon both die. Reuven and Shimon's wives fall to Levi and Yehuda. Reuven and Shimon's wives, it's true they were sisters, but who cares? They came from two different places. So let Levi marry one and let Yehuda marry the other one. What's the problem? They're coming from two different houses. There's no problem to Yibam, Reuven to Levi to Yibam to one sister and Yehuda to Yibam to another sister. Two different people, two different entities, no problem at all. So why in the world in this case are we saying you have to do chalitza? You know what the reason must be? Excuse me. So the reason must be because yesh zika. Must be that there is a connection. So inherently, as soon as Reuven and Shimon die, and these two women who are sisters fall to Yibam, to Levi and Yehuda, the mere fact that they fell to Yibam, that zika, that connection, that waiting period, that shemeres yavam itself must be called something. If that waiting period is called something, now it makes sense why Levi and Yehuda can't do Yibam, because then you're marrying someone who you're the sister you had some connection to, you had a zika to. So kasha, frekti gemara, we see the Rameir obviously holds yesh zika. Answers the Rabba loyla main zika. Really, Rameir holds ein zika. Misham de kasavar aser levato mitzas yavamim. You know the reason why he prefers chalitza na Yibam for a bit of a far-fetched case. Let's hear what the problem is. We're afraid the one is going to do Yibam, Levi, Yehuda's going to drop dead, and when Yehuda drops dead, become a valta mitzvahs Yevamim. Now that other woman you can't do anything to, because once Levi does Yibam to one, the sister is aser, so you can't do Yibam, can't do chalitza to her. So therefore, says the Gemara, to prevent that situation, we go and we say Levi and Yehuda do chalitza. So now for sure, both of these women are waiting Yibam. They'll both have chalitza performed on them. There is no concern, but it's not or kasha and Rameir. Really, Rameir called yesh zika, called ein zika, no kasha at all. Says the Gemara, beautiful answer for Rameir. But now we're holding about 10 lines to the bottom. First of all, that is Yevamim. V'ein zika tivatel. If there's no zika, who cares? If there's no actual connection, what's the big deal? One brother's going to die. There's going to be one Yibam. The other wife is going to get nothing. What's the problem? Tivata, let the Yibam be bataled. Or Rav Gamliel, Rav Gamliel himself holds ein zika. And we know, Motzlevato, Mitzvah Yevamim, he holds, we can be Mevato. What's the problem? You're nullifying and negating a potential Yibam. Who cares? Once the person dies, there's no Yibam. There's no Yibam. What's the problem? Says the Gemara, the Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, Rav Gamliel, let's say we have a situation of Yibam, we have a situation of a Ketana, someone who is married to a woman who was underaged, which of course we know is a Kedushin Dirabanan, and then that man, the sister falls to him to Yibam. So says Rav Gamliel, if the Ketana walks away from the marriage, Mina, she walks away, and now the sister could come and marry this man. They were sisters, who cares? Mian uproots the whole thing from the beginning. V'loi mianon, if the wife did not do mian, tam did not shatikdo, we have to wait until she grows up. And then the sister will leave because of achais isha, the wife of the sister of the wife. So what do we see? That according to Rav Gamliel, there's no problem at all. He doesn't care that we're going to have to wait and there'll end up being no Yibam. It's going to uproot the whole story. It doesn't bother us because he holds ein zika. When you hold ein zika, there's no real connection. We don't bother the fact that it's going to negate the whole story. So I asked the Gemara, why by us don't we say the same thing? Amar Lei says, Rabba, to Rav Gamliel, Ad Rameir Karamis, what's you thinking? What's your shailog? Rav Gamliel and Rameir, the two different opinions. Says it by a lie. Let me tell you what my kasha was. Rameir chayesh afil lesveika. We see that Rameir is concerned, even for a suffix. Maybe it's going to be mevatel mitzvahs Yevamin. Remember the far-fetched concern of Rameir that maybe one will do Yibam, and before the second one gets a chance, they'll drop dead. So Rameir is going to such an extreme. So the problem is Rameir chayesh afil lesveika and Rav Gamliel afil levate lechayesh. We have such extremes. We never like a machlekes being to such extremity. So how can it be that Amir goes all the way one way, being chayshish, being concerned over there, and Rav Gamliel is not going to be concerned at all? Says the Gemara, what's the problem? One that's not concerned is not concerned at all. He use that not 1%. Even if Rav Gamliel is not worried about the man the chayish Amir. Feel the sveika chayish. The Gemara is not bothered by that story. So the Gemara has successfully answered up for Rav Yehuda that there is no problem at all. So Amar Le Abaye Rav Yosef in the last line of the Rav Yehuda, Dishmuel. This didn't Rav Yehuda that you're not allowed to marry the Yevama. Why? Because of Yesh Zika. Excuse me, not allowed to marry the Yevama's mother. Because of Yesh Zika, says the Gemara. This is really the opinion of Shmuel. The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, as we turn over to Yod Ches Amid Beis, the Tanan, Shemeres Yavam Shekidish Alchaves Achai. So we have one who waiting Gibam that the brother, a different brother, married the Yevama sister. Mishum Rav Yudah ben Mesira Amru Imrim Lai. What do we tell him? Hamtin, wait at Sheyase Alchicha Ma'isa. We tell them, wait until your brother does Yimur Chalitza and then marry the sister. V'Amar Shmuel, and Shmuel explains Halachik Rav Yudah ben Mesira. Now, what's the reason to wait? The reason is that there is the Zika, and that is the reason. That is where Rav Yehuda got his din. Rav Yehuda paskening like his Rebbe Shmuel. Amar Lei responds the Gemara, Rav Mai. And if Rav Yehuda held like Rav, what would the problem be? It sounds like the Gemara has a vested interest to prove Rav Yehuda holds like Shmuel. Says the Gemara, let him hold like Rav. What's the problem? Says the Gemara, you know what the problem would be? Kasha derav aderav. That would be the stira. But says the Gemara, who cares? Damam Ryan no liba derav. So machlekes amarayim into what the opinion of Rav is. Says Abaye, no. Kiva de itmar mishmei de Shmuel behedya mishmei derav kamaray lo shavkina mishmei de Shmuel behedya makmina karay. Explains the Gemara, you're right. Theoretically, you could have explained that it's going with Rav and it's a Machlekas Amarayim. But because we have a clear Raya that Rav Yehuda is going like his Rebbe Shmuel, we rather explain he's going like Shmuel and not say he's going like Rav, and there's a Machlekas Amarayim exactly what Rav holds. Says the Gemara Amrav Kahana, finishing up a different way of learning the din of Rav Yehuda. I'm reading the Shemaita Kamei Rav Zvin Minaharda. Amar, they said over this teaching in front of Rav Zidam and Ardan. Amar, he said, you learned this Mishnah. Anon behedya matanitzan, I learned the following Mishnah. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Explicitly, Rav Yehuda talking the name of Shmuel, Shemar Zem Shemeisa Aser Be'ima Amar Kesavar Yeish Zika. Clearly, Vaza Shmuel Tamei, and now the Brisa says explicitly. Shmuel goes according to his reasoning. Amar Shmuel Lachik Rav Yehuda ben Beseira Utzrichi, and now explains the Gemara. We need both teachings. We need to Shmuel to say both dinim. It's only with one brother, like the Havamina we started off with today. Kamash Malan, the second din of Shmuel. And that is the end of the discussion of the Shitas of Yehuda in the fact that he holds Yesh Zika. And now we continue with a new Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, really piggybacking almost a first cousin of the first Mishnah in the parak of the Ishes Achshalayha Ba'ailamai, Levi being born later in the story. He says the Mishnah, really, it's actually good, as we'll see, will be a Reisha and a Seif, will be two cases discussing the same din, and from the nuance, the fine difference between the two cases, we're going to have a massive machlekes in din. Says the Mishnah, Shnei Achan Umeis Echem Mehem, we have two brothers, Ruvain dies, V'yabam Hasheni is Ishes Yachim, and Shimon does Yibum. And then after Shimon did Yibum, Levi is born. Umeis. And then what happened? Shimon dies. Hari Shaina, Ruvain's former wife, and which Ruvain's former wife we're going to call what? We're going to call the Yevama. That is the previous Mishnah. That's Ishavach Shaybalamai. Vashniya Misham Saras as the Tzara. Asaba Maimer. Let's say Shimon didn't actually fully marry the Yevama. He just started the story. He did a Maimer. Umeis Ashniya. Let's let me say. Abemes, as we see now, there's going to be some remnants of the Zika of the connection. Shimon didn't consummate the marriage, and we're going to have to do Chalitza to rid ourselves of that little remainder from that marriage. Shimon Oimer says, Rav Shimon, very importantly, Rav Shimon comments on this Mishnah. Rav Shimon's commenting on the first case of the Mishnah, the case of the Mishnah that said, Ruvain dies, Shimon does Yibum, and then Levi is born. Says Shimon on that case, miyabim leizamim sheyirtza. Not like the Mishnah said that the Rishayna is Yaitzu because Eishach Rishayna by Lamai and the Shniya is Atzara. Says Rav Shimon, I disagree with the din of Eishach Rishayna by Lamai. I disagree in this case that Levi is born afterwards. Rather, says Shimon, you're allowed to do Yibam. Says Mem Shir to do Yibam or Chalitza, whichever one you want. So obviously the big question is, we have the first Mishnah teaching me a case of Eishach Rishayna by Lamai. We have the second Mishnah teaching me a very similar case. Rav Shimon argues on the second case. Says the Gemara, Rav Aishia, Chalukaya Rav Shimon Afrishain. Rav Shimon only says that he argues on our Mishnah, but indeed he even argues on the first Mishnah, the case in which the brother was born before Shimon does Yibam. Again, the first case of the parak was that Ruvain dies, Shimon before he manages to do Yibam, then Levi is born. In our case, Levi is born after Shimon does Yibam. So says Rav Aishia, Rav Shimon argues on both cases, and we'll see tomorrow that are those who argue and say, no, Rav Shimon said it here, he argues here. But before we get to there, says the Gemara, Mimhai, how do we know that Rav Shimon argues in both cases? Midiktani Mishnah Yeseira, for the fact that we have an extra Mishnah. Let's explain. Baba the Reish Laman Ketanila, first case in our Mishnah today, that after Shimon does Yibam, Levi is born. Why do we need that case? If it's court teaching me for the din of the Rabbanan that they're potter, that the Tzara and the Yavam are a potter from Levi, Hashta Yavam, Ulubsaif Nailad. In our case, in which they did Yibam, and then the brother is born, the so when Levi is born, what is Levi born into? Levi is born into a situation of heter, because Shimon already married this woman. Yet, Asi Rabbanan, the Rabbanan come along and say, Levi is not allowed to do Yibam and Chalitz, as we saw in our Mishnah, that the Shniya is Yaitz because Eishach Rishayna ba'Lama, and the Shniya because of Tzarasa. In the first case, asked the Gemara, Noila, when Levi is born, and then Shimon does Yibam, well, we have to say such a din. So why did the Mishnah say the first case in our Mishnah? You know why? It says Rav Aishia, Rav Shimon. It says it to teach us that Rav Shimon is arguing on both cases. And now we're going to explain. Rav Shimon, the first Mishnah was teaching us the Chiddush of Rav Shimon, in which Rav Shimon says that even when Levi is born, before Shimon does Yibam, still Levi eventually will be allowed to do Yibam, and explains the Gemara, really Rav Shimon should have argued even in the first case. So why did it only say in the latter case, Rav Shimon had a man, she had midas, he let the Rabbanan finish talking. They said the case in the first Mishnah, they said the case in the second Mishnah. Rabbanan finished talking, then comes Vadar Poligalai. Rav Shimon argues. Says the Gemara, so Rav Aishia holds that Rav Shimon is arguing in both cases. Before we go into Rav Aishia, let's delve a dot into Rav Shimon, let's delve a dot into Rav Aishia, and then we're going to call it a day. Ask the Gemara, according to Rav Aishia, Rav Shimon is arguing in both cases. So what is the case of Eishaz Achshalei Ba'alamai? There is a P'tur, as we'll see, he learned it out from a pasuk. So what is that case? Explains the Gemara, either when it's one brother and he died childless, then Levi is born. That's one case that Levi will be pater. Hinami, or else betray two brothers, v'lo yavam, v'lo meis. No yibam, no death, and that's going to be the case. And then while they're awaiting Yibam, that's when Levi is born. That's going to be the case in which Levi will not be allowed to do Yibam or Chalitza. We're running slow on time, so we're going to have to stop over here. And tomorrow, B'siyat Tishmai, we're going to delve a bit deeper, both into this last case in which Rav Aishia or Rav Shimon admits there's Eishaz Ba'Elamai, and in the larger picture, these two Mishnayos, the Shita of Rav Aishia and those that argue.